The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, in his book, written as a guide to his possessions for the benefit of his teenage son, who will inherit the lot one day, John Eccleston's 101 Things, Piece by Piece, of a royal childhood. He's here to tell us all about it from his book called Garlick. Welcome to the show, John.
Hi, Selina.
So, tell us, why is the book called Garlick?
Well, I came from a house called Garlick House. And it's the old-fashioned spelling of garlic, Garlick. But in our family, it was just sort of the habit that we just used to talk about garlic if you're going to visit Garlick, or people were coming to visit you at Garlick. So that's Garlick.
And this is in Lancashire, in the Lancashire countryside.
It's in Lancashire countryside, sort of the deep countryside between Preston and Blackpool, the Fylde.
So, I mean, I love the idea because I'm a bit of a hoarder and I like to collect things and make books for prosperity and things like that. But what happened? Because I know you, when your father's house was cleared, you collected all these things and you've kept them all these years. What made you do that? And why was the house cleared anyway?
Well, my mum had died first, and then my dad, he was quite a bit older actually, so that was a bit of an upset and surprise to us. But then after a year or so, he hurt his hip, couldn't manage on his own in the house, which was quite a sort of dilapidated, uncomfortable house anyway. So he decided he wanted to go into a care home. And then he didn't really want to take much with him. I mean, there wasn't much opportunity to take a lot of things with him. But I really feel as if he felt that it was the idea of leaving the house after all those years was sort of like the end of everything, really. And he just didn't want to take things with him. So I felt as if it felt as if suddenly all my childhood was suddenly about to sort of disappear, all the things I'd been familiar with for all those years. And so my sister organized a van, and her and my brother-in-law drove down to London with this van load of furniture and books and odds and ends and records and kitchen things. And they somehow managed to pack them into my little studio flat in London and then waved goodbye and left me with them.
What you'd normally do is take them to a charity shop, wouldn't you? But I think I'd do exactly the same as you did.
And, I would have liked to almost, I felt like it had all happened a little bit too suddenly for me. Dad had been sailing along. He was old and he had a few sort of ailments, but then it happened that suddenly he couldn't manage on his own. And so we had to make these decisions really suddenly. And, I think sometimes people just save everything, don't they? And then think about it afterwards,
Yeah.
and that's what I did. But the problem was that not that long afterwards, I met the woman who became my wife, Alison, and she had a house. And when I moved into her house, there actually was room for all these things that there hadn't really been room for in my little studio flat. And so, fast forwards quite a few years now, and most of these things somehow are just part of our lives here.
Wow, thank goodness for Alison. If you'd have stayed in the flat, you might never have kept them all.
It's possible. I might not have been able to get out of the flat at some point. That would have been the danger, I think.
So can you say, or would you rather not say, how many years later this is? Because to keep them all this time, and a lot of them, I don't know how many years later, but are some of them antiques now, or do they just mean something to you?
Well, a lot of it, I wouldn't call anything of it antiques. You might find a man in a junk shop who would tell you some things were antique. There's maybe one or two old books that are a little bit valuable, but mostly it was quite junky furniture, really. There were two sideboards and a terrible old chair and an old stool I used to sit on and a big aspidistra plant and things like that. And lots of things in the kitchen I didn't really need, but I took anyway because Mum had used them and I like the look of them more. I like to remember Mum using them, So this was not long after 2000. So I've had them for, well, time marches on, isn't it? So that's like 2 decades now, some of these things.
Yeah.
And really, I've not really got rid of many of them.
And do they still mean a lot to you now? I mean, do you look at, you mentioned your mum, for example, do you look at certain things and you get reminded of your childhood days?
Well, I do. I mean, I think we're all different, aren't we? I mean, I've had a friend recently who's been through the whole same process, really, a little bit later than me. And he's really got rid of almost everything, you know. But I mean, I think he finds that interesting that I'm so very different, you know. I think I've always been interested in things and what they remind me of, and the sort of the stories that they prompt you to remember, you know. So yeah, I do. I mean, the thing was, I've been thinking about this book for quite a while, because I would sort of tell my son about these things, and he would be sort of interested, you know, because we lead, you know, he's a city boy, and my life in the countryside was very different, quite primitive, really, compared to what he's used to. So I would tell him things, and it seemed to sort of stick in a little bit, you know, as he was growing up. But I thought possibly not. And then sort of in lockdown, you know, when you're at home so much anyway, the idea for the book really started to sort of motor along a bit, because I kind of thought I was with all these things, and I started to think, well, this old spoon, or this old toasting fork, or this bit of old furniture, you know, this is all things from my childhood. And that really, there was that feeling that, you know, it's like with an old photograph, isn't it? That it might be an interesting photograph, but if you don't know the story of the people, then will people care about the photograph later on? So I wanted to sort of set down the stories with the things. So with the idea possibly really that Fred, you know, when he did come to have them, wouldn't want to get rid of all of them, you know?
I think it gets more and more difficult as time goes on, because you think, well, I've kept them this long, why would I get rid of them now?
This is it. I mean, I think partly the business of writing the book, setting the stories down, possibly you feel that setting the stories down is the most important thing, and it's the stories rather in the end than the objects themselves. But having said that, you know, there's a ring, there's an old ploughing trophy that my granddad won for ploughing a straight line with horses. There are several things that I'm really sort of making a play in the book directly to my son. You know, Fred, you need to keep these things. These are, you know, the Eccleston things that you need to look after, and maybe pass on to, you know, more Ecclestons down the line, if there are any.
Yeah, yeah. Is he happy about that, Fred?
Well, he is. I mean, I think people were. I sort of get very enthusiastic. I'm a great man for sort of enthusiastic projects, and people were sort of friendly, but a little bit puzzled as to how interesting old bits really were, you know. But he's read the book now, and I think he's been, you know, he's really engaged with it, you know, and what his dad's life was like when, you know, he was a child, you know. So I'm satisfied really on that score.
Yeah, and I think that's important, especially, I mean, if you'd have stayed in Lancashire and he'd have been brought up there, it probably wouldn't mean as much to him. But because your lives are so different, because as you say, he's a city boy, you know, he's learning about your childhood, which he would never have known.
Well, he is. I mean, you know, various things make his eyes pop a little bit, you know. So we had a house that initially didn't have a bathroom, and it had an outside toilet. There wasn't a flush toilet. And then at a certain point, the landlord improved the house. But he put a bathroom in, but he didn't put a toilet in. And then later on, it was my dad who sorted out a septic tank so that we could sort of join the flush toilet 20th century. And, you know, the idea of his dad having a bath as a boy in a little tin bath in front of a fire, which was the only source of heat in the house. You know, we had one fireplace in the front room. And so it's it's funny, isn't it? The 1960s, 70s, they're within touching distance of those of us who are a bit more, in our prime, as I like to say, a bit more mature, but still it can be a long time ago, really.
Yeah. Well, it is.
Know now.
Yeah, you like to think it isn't, but it is. I mean, I'm sound like a similar age to you, and I remember being sent down to the shop down the road with a I don't know what you call it, a jerry can maybe, to get paraffin, because we had paraffin heaters in our house to keep us warm, and I used to have to get the paraffin. I mean, what child of 10 years old or whatever would be allowed to do that now? Bring this can back, which was really heavy, and even now, if I get a whiff of anything with paraffin in, it takes me right back there.
Takes you right back, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So how is the book actually written? Is it written, because we mentioned 101 things, is it a list of each thing and what it means to you? So you're talking to Fred?
How it started was, I imagined that I could tell the story, basically in photographs. So I would do a bit of photography. So I thought I would take a photograph of everything, and then I would have a little caption. So it would be item 1, the old cup, and there'd be a little caption. And maybe I thought I would sort of like introduce the stories in a little way. So I was like sort of sneaking the information into my son, sort of thing. So there'd be a little caption, possibly a little paragraph. But of course, as soon as I started to really get cracking with it, I was realizing that the caption was getting longer and longer and longer, and becoming, some of the captions were enormous, like little chapters of a book. And so I thought, and then really I thought that it was the stories rather than the pictures of the things that were important. And so you do get 101 little chapters, some of them brief, maybe like a little paragraph, and then others quite long, tell quite a little story. There's one that tells the story of what our childhood day trips were like on holidays, things like that. And then it's kind of a sort of a free-form thing, really. At a certain point, I thought, well, people need to sort of locate the objects in the house. So I break off from time to time and say, well, so this is what the living room was like. These was how things were arranged in the living room. Or then there was another room, sort of a cold sitting room that I used to do my homework in. And then what was the pantry like? What was the kitchen? And then, so I break off every so often, sort of set up in the reader's mind what the room that the things are in is like. But really, the thing with old things is you're never quite sure which memories are going to come back. So I like that, so that a little simple thing can maybe remind you of something that's actually quite personal or quite important to you. It's not necessarily some clunking enormous testament or family Bible or something. It might just be some spoon that your mum used to use that makes you think about something about her, or about how maybe how she was when she was ill or something like that. So, and then I guess I just try to bring it all together, which I hope I've done. It sort of tells that really as you go along, in a way you kind of go backwards as we start to sort of look at what a lot of these things that belong to my mum and dad, some of them to my mum and dad when they were children. So as you go forward in the book, you start to sort of go backwards into what their lives as children were like, but also at the same time you're going forward into them getting older and the problems they had as they got older. And then of course what happens to all our parents, that we have to say goodbye and they die. Yeah.
I think this is probably also going to be good for you though, John, because sadly all our memories fade after a while. And at the moment, writing the book, you've said, this is what this room looked like, this is what the pantry was like. But in another 30 or 40 years, at least you'll be able to look back and it might bring back memories of what it was like to you. Yes, I hope so. I mean, as luck would have it, having finished the book, I felt that I was sort of on the up and marching forward to do something else. But I do have quite bad health problems now that I've only discovered after the book. So it's almost it does feel a bit of a summing up for me. It does, the book as well, because I've sort of told my story
as well as the stories of the things, you know. I mean, my son said to me, "Dad, it's an autobiography, really, isn't it?" And in a way, I think it is, because how you respond to things and the things you have to respond to. I mean, that's your story, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, it is, and it's your legacy. It's your legacy to pass on, as you say.
Yes.
Well, if people want to find out more about the book and those 101 things, you can buy the book right now from our website, TRE.radio. It's called Garlick, and it's by John Eccleston, who we're chatting to now. John, sorry to hear about your health. I wish you well, and thank you so much for telling us about your book today.
Thanks, Selina. Cheers.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.